The first question I have is for Mike, and again, others can chime in on this question as well. There's been a lot of talk about suppliers and how they've reduced their cost and what they've done and how we think they're going to go forward and be profitable. The question is, do you think they've cut too much capacity in an effort to reduce costs to the point where if they have to expand in the industry that they're going to really struggle as they go forward to get to 15 million again?
Should I turn this on automatically or not?
I don't know. You should be on. They should be on.
Can you hear me? Okay. It's a great question. You know, it's funny, I was with one of the biggest PMs in the country last week, and he's been a very successful automotive investor. And one of the things he asked me is, he thinks demand is going to be 14 million units, light vehicle, next year. It's going to be much stronger than anybody thinks. And some of the suppliers that he's invested in and talked to say they can't get there. They'll be struggling. They'll be being constrained, capacity will be constrained. And is the industry ready to get back to 13 or 14 million units pretty quickly? Yeah, I think suppliers will be affected. I think there will be some margin pressure. They probably will struggle with overtime and excess freight and those sorts of things if we get up to 13 or 14 million units. In 2011, for U.S. light vehicle sales, vehicle manufacturers will make a ton of money. Pricing will improve. So we would hope that some of it will trickle down through the suppliers on the pricing front. But I think from my perspective, it'd be a nice problem to have.
Any other thoughts from the panelists?
Yeah, we saw, I think, from the semiconductor piece that there are likely to be some of those issues. If we have that kind of bounce up, certainly in 2011, we're going to see some, questionably see some shortages. I don't think we're geared up for that kind of a jump. At least in the short term. I think everybody's looking at a run-up and gearing up appropriately. That being said, there's plenty of room from an efficiency standpoint in gains without brick and mortar to be able to pick up another 20%.
Just kind of a follow-up question to that. You would talk about potential lack of capacity. What about potential of other suppliers' bankruptcy? Do we think, we've talked about a lot of people that have done really well and restructured their balance sheet, but we know not everybody has, and lots of analysts predicted bankruptcies that didn't occur. Do we expect to see some more coming in 2011?
On the bankruptcy front, we've really seen kind of an evening. I mean, the banks have really taken a step back. They are not calling in the loans. They pushed those numbers back out to 2012, 2013 in many cases. So here in the U.S., we really are not expecting a run-up of any major bankruptcies right now. That being said, I probably wouldn't say that, frankly, about the EU and Asia. Really, 70% of our distress team right now is operating outside the U.S.
Norm, the question for you is, do you think that the U.S. will ever adopt a carbon cap and trade policy?
Ever. That's a long time. I think we're going to see in the near term some more specific laws such as a renewable portfolio standard, which would require a certain percentage of electricity to come from renewable sources. So that's a more, let's say, socially acceptable or politically acceptable solution. Longer term, it's possible. In fact, if you look at, there are already two, an East Coast and a West Coast collaborative that where the states are already agreed, including some Mexican states and some provinces in Canada, to work together on a cap and trade plan. So whether it goes nationally or not, I think the success of those programs will determine that.
Not a lot of discussion today about Chrysler. We talked a little bit about Ford and GM, both of you did. Thoughts on Chrysler, where we think the market's going for them, where you think they're, with the Fiat alliances or purchase, I guess, where do you think that's going? Any thoughts about that? Mike, you want to start?
Yeah, I think that's a big question for a lot of people where Chrysler goes. I think when you look on it on paper, Chrysler does still have some pretty viable platforms and brands, particularly Jeep pickup trucks. Longer term, maybe it's healthier for the industry if Chrysler does not continue in the same vein. I'm not sure what Fiat's total commitment is, and you have mixed results. I'm not sure, did they put in any money yet, or did they just promise the new platforms and products? I think they have to stay in another 6 or 12 months at least to get their increased share. After that, I think it's a big open question mark. Chrysler still has some very strong brands that obviously have some room in the marketplace. There's no talk that I've seen about them trying to go into the public market. The government ownership and union ownership is still going to be there. It's going to be a big question mark for Wall Street. I think most people, the perception is they're writing off Chrysler. And I think, unfortunately, people have done that in the past and have been quite wrong. So we'll wait and see.
Kind of every 10 years.
Yeah.
Norm, a question about Bosch specifically. How is Bosch benefiting from lobbyist efforts that you have as you look towards the 50 mile per gallon estimate? Is it really possible, as you showed, what's Bosch's position in this environment? Kind of a threefold question there for you.
Let me, I guess, take the last part. We don't lobby for higher fuel economy requirements. What, if anything, what our communication is that Congress and indeed all governments need to be technology neutral when they make decisions. They shouldn't preference one technology over another. So that's really where our effort is. And in terms of where that benefits specifically the company, well, we make nearly all the technologies used. We do see, though, that diesel technology is one that is underutilized in the U.S. We've seen great benefits in Europe. So near term, we think that as long as that can compete, is allowed to compete in the U.S., that has some opportunity.
Okay, Kimberly, you do a lot of work with the OEMs and with the supply base. Have you seen any changes in structure, in communication and collaboration, and how they work together? Is that model changing at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think people are very aware of the supplier relationships right now, and the critical importance. I think technology is driving some of that. Clearly, all the OEs want the latest technology, and to get that, really collaboration is an important piece. Transparency, again, is an important piece as well. So I think part of the exchange for that is that the OEs don't want to be surprised on the financial side. They want to understand bad news before it happens, and they're prepared more to work through some of those issues. But to have that obviously negatively affect production when there's something that they could have done to mitigate those factors, that's where the transparency piece comes in. But cost continues to be a factor. So you have technology, you have cost. Cost always drives conflict in the OE and supplier relationships. But I think more openness to communication, transparency on both sides is really what they're striving for.
Okay. Norm, why do you think that diesel engines are not more attractive in the U.S.?
I think a lot of that comes down to cost, and people make decisions based on they're very sensitive to the dollar price, and a diesel engine does have more technology, so typically you would expect a higher technology powertrain to have more cost. Really, I think that it comes down to economics, and over time I think the economics will work out. But also there's, like, for example, we hear a lot about electrification from the government right now, and for good reason, because Bosch also believes electrification is the future. But oftentimes the near-term solutions are maybe not discussed as much.
That's a great question. Okay, let's talk about GM a little bit. A couple questions about GM specifically. First off, do you think GM has the right management to succeed and to be sustainable? Mike, why don't you start with that one, your insight on that?
I don't know. When you look at the prospect about GM going public, as an analyst in Wall Street, I know the first question that's going to come up is you've had 4 CEOs in 18 months. So that's unstable in my mind. I think a lot of the core General Motors is still there.